Novick. Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Hales.
Here, Commissioner Novick will be here shortly. There he is.
Here. Sorry.
And Commissioner Saltzman is away. Okay, we have one item left over from this morning that we need to deal with, which was pulled to the regular calendar, and that's item 816.
816, pay claim of Leona Decat in the sum of $85,000 involving the Parks Bureau.
Who pulled this one, Carla?
Mr. Walsh.
And
Oh.
is he present?
I do not see him.
Mayor, I would just
He's not,
move to
then.
a vote on this.
Sorry, Jim. So let's proceed then. Roll call, please.
Novick.
Aye.
Fritz.
I spoke with Mr. Walsh, and he just was concerned about it being on consent rather than regular. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hales.
Aye. Okay, approved. Now, let's move to the afternoon calendar, item 824.
Amend code to reflect changes to the organizational structure, positions, and responsibilities of the Office of Management and Finance.
And probably want to go ahead and read the other three items as well, so that Fred and his team can talk about the whole package.
825, create a new non-represented classification of Revenue and Financial Services Director and establish a compensation rate for the new classification. 826, amend city administrative rules to reflect the transfer of program responsibility for Title II ADA and Title VI Civil Rights Compliance programs from the Office of Management and Finance to the Office of Equity and Human Rights. And 827, adopt and amend the city comprehensive financial management policies and procedures.
Thank you. Well, some points of context. Again, this is a multi-month effort. These items represent some of the last steps in implementing the reorganization of the Office of Management and Finance. So what's before us today is amending code language, creating a new classification, amending our administrative rules. As the council remembers, we had Moss Adams conduct an organizational and operational assessment of OMF and looked at its structure and key positions with the advice of a really excellent Blue Ribbon Committee of folks from the private sector and from other large governmental organizations that were here to advise and guide that work. We had a citizens task force working through that analysis with us, and they weighed in on the resulting report and the recommendations of the consultants. Some of these recommendations have already been put into place through the budget process and administratively, but as I said, the rest of these require council action. I understand we have an amended substitute document for 824, is that right? And it's here as amended Exhibit B. So we need a motion to enter that version into the record.
So moved.
Second.
And council roll call on putting the substitute on the table.
Could the staff just tell briefly
Yes.
for
So
those
you
at
want-
home
you want-
what's in it?
You want to walk us through what's the difference in the
In the
amended?
two, we added a word on the amended one. One of the commissioners' requests that the new Director of Revenue and Finance would not only give information but advice.
And as well as
And that was one of the changes.
and parallel structure to the language of the CAO, serving all of council and providing not only information, but the additional words and advice to elected officials.
Right, and then down in 315.050.
Adding the word equity
adding the word
to
equity there.
the range of BHR functions.
So those were clarification changes with those additions or changes. So roll call on putting the substitute before the council.
Novick.
Aye.
Fritz.
So the reason that I asked for the words "and advice" to be added to the charge of the Chief Financial Officer, the Revenue Bureau Director, is that I want it to be very clearly understood that, like the Budget Director, that person has the responsibility to go independently give advice to the council rather than waiting for us to ask the right question, which would be more the information giving. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hales.
Aye. Thank you. So Director Miller.
Thank you. Fred Miller from OMF with Celia Heron, who actually has answers to your questions if you have any, but I'm hoping that you don't have too many because we're really implementing decisions that you've already made and discussed. So I'm going to go through fairly rapidly and then see if there's anything you want to slow down on. But there may be more discussion of item number 4, which relates to the city financial management policies. And at that time, Andrew will come up and, along with Celia, respond to your questions. So the first item relates to the change in the code language relating to OMF, and it basically creates this new Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services, broadly states the responsibilities of the director of that bureau. As you're aware, transfers some regulatory programs to PBOT, and then moves EBS to BTS, if you're with me on the acronyms. So that is something that is just necessary to implement the organizational changes that are in the budget and you have already discussed. And assuming there are no questions there, moving to the next one, basically what you need to do today is approve a new classification of Revenue and Financial Services Director and the compensation rate. There's more work to do as we announce that position and more discussion we can have, but this is just saying, yes, the classification is approved and the pay rate. And the third item is, again, something that you've already looked at. We've moved the Title II and Title VI programs to the Bureau of Equity, and the changes basically transfer them and then authorize the OEHR director to implement the existing administrative rules. And again, I think that's not controversial.
Okay. Questions for Fred or Celia?
I have a
These three
question.
items?
I have a couple of questions, and I just noticed in the 1315-040A, it refers to the Office of Community Technology. It's actually the Office for Community Technology. So we need to make that a scrivener's error. But the reason I was drawn to that was because the person who's in charge of the Office for Community Technology is a manager, but then under E here, we've got the Revenue Division shall be supervised by a director who shall report to the RFS director. And we had some conversation about that awkwardness of, is the director a director? Is the revenue director still a director, or how are you framing that?
We took the approach in making these code changes to make the minimalist approach. We recognize that a number of the organizations described in code under OMF lack parallel structure. And the issue of taking the Revenue Bureau and now creating a revenue division did raise that question of, is that position still a director or not? That needs to be resolved, but we figured we would do the organizational changes in code that have to be addressed, and then we could look at the HR issues of, can a director report to a director? That said, we also would not be surprised if the new director of this bureau comes in and looks at the organizational structure and may suggest other changes. So we didn't want to presume to make those changes until that person was on board.
Do I have in my packet an organizational chart of the?
No, you do not.
So maybe that would be helpful before the vote next week if you could just lay out under the new OMF who's where.
The vote next week?
Are we voting next week? This
Well,
gets code
two of
changes,
these
right?
are today, and then the administrative rules is next week.
The code changes are emergency ordinances?
Yes.
Right.
Oh.
But we can definitely get you an org chart.
Why are we making them as emergency ordinances?
We were hoping to get the code changed so that when the recruitment goes out for the new position, any person looking online to see what the code is that describes the position and duties is up to date with what council has directed.
Other questions?
Fred, I'll ask you a question because we've been having a lot of discussions in our office. In fact, we're going to charge you rent for all the time you're spending there. And one of the issues we've been debating is the significance of having a CPA credential for the person will be functioning as the CFO. And why don't you just again state your view on that and why you think we've hit the right balance in the recruitment?
Well, this job is designed to be larger than what used to be in the city as a CFO. It has some high-level responsibilities and lots of communication with both the CAO and CBO as well as with the council. And we've listed the requirements for that job. My personal reaction is we don't need preference to particular educational achievements if we're trying to get the best people in the hunt. And I think we will get some good people. I just didn't. My reaction is we don't have to narrow that.
And so let me try and put it in my words to make sure I understand. So you don't want to limit the pool unnecessarily. That's
Correct.
one of the concerns you had.
Correct.
But we're also hoping to have a robust pool from which we could pick the most qualified person, and that person might actually have credentials above the minimum.
Sure.
The second question I wanted to ask you is, we're creating an interesting hybrid here, and a lot of what we're doing is a result of compromise and thoughtful discussions that we've had between the second floor and the third floor. So this person, once they're in place, is going to have to balance three important relationships: a relationship with you, a relationship with the mayor, and a relationship with the council as a whole. We've struck a delicate balance here, but we've done it deliberately. So do you see any risk that the council will not be receiving that kind of unvarnished advice that we're seeking, even if occasionally it means respectfully disagreeing with either the mayor or the CAO?
Commissioner, great question, and I don't see the problem. I think if you look at existing operations, the mayor has told me that I'm responsive to all of you and has never given me any instructions not to share information or advice or whatever. And I think that Andrew's position as far as CBO works fine. I mean, there's a model there where I think people do respond directly, give advice, and hopefully say dumb idea when necessary.
Yeah, and we're deliberately encouraging that kind of independence.
That's
We're
right.
not trying to create a culture of insubordination, but I think your example of the Independent Budget Office is a good one. And Andrew is a frequent visitor of my office disagreeing with things that I care about, because his job is actually to give his professional opinion, not to curry favor. And the difference is he's wholly outside of OMF. Here, we've agreed to do it within the OMF framework.
Correct.
But again, and my confidence in this has a lot to do with the conversations we've had and your commitment to this approach. But you see no structural impediment to getting the same kind of independence as the council seeking from this position that we have with Andrew, who operates wholly outside of OMF.
Yeah, I see no reason why there should be. I mean,
It depends on the person we hire.
It does, and that's one thing I would look for, actually, in that job, is someone who can handle ambiguity. Because if one's locked into an existing structure and has to worry about talking to someone before talking to you, I think we made a mistake. I mean, I would think there'd be a very free flow of conversation.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
Other questions? And then, do we have anybody signed up on the first three items? Again, we'll take the 827 last because Andrew Scott needs to come up and discuss that. But anyone signed up on 824, 825, or 826?
I had one sign-up sheet for all, and no one has signed up.
Mayor, I'd like to ask questions of Dante James, if I may.
Sure. Dante, why don't you come up and join your colleagues up here, please?
Afternoon, Council.
So I know since we worked on it quite some time ago that you are supportive of the changes to Title II and Title VI. I just wanted to verify that that's still the case.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate the work OMF did in putting this language together and transferring this over to the office. Just as an FYI, we will be coming back probably within the next 30 to 45 days with some additional administrative rules as it relates to Title II and Title VI, specifically how to request an exemption to the ADA requirements and things of that nature. And it was decided that it was best not to just transfer authority from OMF to my office, but bring it back to council for an understanding of that's what we're asking for in terms of my office's ability to create administrative rules and get the approval of council to do that.
Right. Celia, is this the time that I bring up the administrative rules? Thank you for reminding me of that. One of the issues with moving parts of the Revenue Bureau to transportation is that currently administrative rules on things like taxi cabs are in OMF, and as Mr. Miller pointed out, he was very responsive to all of us. If they go into a particular bureau, then there's maybe less opportunity for other council members to be aware of changes in administrative rules. And although there's a public process in all the administrative rules, currently the council doesn't necessarily get notified of administrative rules in another bureau other than OMF. So I believe that we should just establish, and maybe ask Celia, I'm asking Celia to come back with a resolution to require that when administrative rules are being considered in any bureau, that council is copied as well as the public, so that we have the opportunity to review them. And similarly, that any bureau that doesn't currently have the opportunity to create its own administrative rules be given that ability. It's no coincidence that in both the Office of Equity and Human Rights and in the City Budget Office, which my office was instrumental in creating, neither of those was given that capacity. And although, as a practical matter, most of the time both of those bureaus will want to come back to council for approval of the administrative rules, it seems sensible to make it the same across the board.
Thank you. I think it's important, certainly as we engage with the public much more as it relates to compliance issues regarding civil rights actions, that we have the ability to do that.
So I'm seeing nods from
Yep,
my
makes sense to
colleagues.
me.
Thank you.
Makes sense.
And then the other just minor detail, well, not minor detail, important detail that I wanted to check with you was regarding inserting the word equity into part of the charge for the Bureau of Human Resources, and wanted your comments on that.
No, well, certainly I appreciate any bureau taking the responsibility to address equity within their charge and their responsibilities. I guess I would offer just a suggestion in terms of the language specifically, given what HR specifically does. And if I could just read it real quickly, my suggestion would be, in terms of specifically just using the words diversity and equity and outreach, et cetera, but that its role is to promote and ensure diversity and equity and outreach, employment and recruitment services. I think that would make it a little bit cleaner about what HR's role specifically is and what they will be tasked with doing, since that is in some sense their responsibility is to ensure that outreach and that the promotional and employment opportunities are done from an equitable perspective.
Okay, I'm not.
So
Maybe while we hear the other testimony, you and Celia could work on a proposed amendment to that section. It's section 315.050A.
Okay, I think I'm adding 2 words, so that's kind of what it is, but I'm getting those looks. Thank you, Celia.
I'm trying to focus on you.
Okay,
with
that's
my
what it was. I
glasses
understand. But no, I'm happy to do that, so
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah, it's just a construction issue in this section. There's a long list of tasks
Right.
for BHR, for Bureau of Human Resources. So,
This sounds like a friendly amendment, Mayor.
yeah, it is
It is a friendly amendment, but actually I do need to put it on the table so that folks can testify on it if you want to vote on this all today.
Yep,
So
okay.
can you
Yep.
tell me what the amendment is that I need to move?
Okay.
If
Tell me
this
what I want
testimony-
to say here.
What you want to say is,
I don't know where it is on what you're looking at.
no, let's go one more page. That's BRFS. Excuse us, Fred. So,
Oh, here it is, so right here. So it would
Oh,
be
this-
to promote and ensure
Amanda?
diversity.
No one has actually signed up for it.
Yeah.
It's a
We don't have
parallel.
anybody
it's a
signed
parallel
up.
thing. We might need to add it in a different place.
We'll give them a moment to see if they can do
Somebody
this
might
on
be
the fly.
furious with my
Right.
amendment. And it's
Mr. Miller, while they're working that out, can I just ask you a question?
You may.
Yeah.
Because we're going to go right to a vote. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Mr. Miller, is tell us again what the council's role is going to be in the recruitment process.
I don't know that it's formally done, but my discussions on the recruitment would be, let's say we get 25 applications, we have someone screen that, and I think it's someone beyond just an HR screening, and get that to, and I'll make up the number, something like 10, and then I would assume that representatives from council offices will be involved at that level, and then I would think that out of that, there would be recommendations to me for 1, 2, or 3 people to talk to. So the council will be involved at that stage.
And then the mayor will bring forth a name to the council.
That's the way it works. I'll give him
Yeah.
one.
But there'll be that intermediate step would be a chance.
Yeah,
for
I
the
would like to
council.
invite other council offices to
be
provide
involved in
somebody
that,
for that.
and-
No, that's
screening process.
anticipated.
This position, although it reports to the CAO, does need to serve the whole council, which is the whole point of that language. Okay, so did we manage to do rapid statutory construction?
Absolutely. Just-in-time code writing. We're gonna
Just-in-time
very
code
good at
writing
that.
by Celia Heron. She's
And
done this
just
before.
Anna Canwet is not here to, I'm trying to channel her. If you're looking at the phrase, it starts, human resources system for the city, including labor relations and negotiations, promoting diversity and equity in outreach, employment, and recruitment services,
Okay.
blah, blah, blah.
So I move that revised language.
Any further discussion on that? So let's take a roll call on substituting that language.
Novick,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Fish,
Aye.
Hales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Celia and Dante. Aye. Okay, so we have no one signed up to testify, I believe, on this package of items. What's that?
Just ask if anybody
Is
wants
anybody, I know, is anyone else here that wants to? Okay, so then we will thank this team for good work, and we'll take a roll call on 824 and 825, and then 826 will pass the second reading.
824, Novick,
Aye.
Fritz.
This is the whimper at the end of a very long and tumultuous discussion, so I'm pleased that apparently the community either gave up at the end of the process or is satisfied with the outcome. I am satisfied with the outcome, and I'm appreciative of all of the discussion that's gone to get here. Aye.
Fish,
Well, Commissioner Fritz, I have a slightly different take on that, which is we've been collectively working on this for a year. And in the best tradition of this body, working out compromises to get to a place where we can all unanimously support this approach. And I just want to acknowledge that there's been lots of twists and turns in this discussion, and different views passionately held by members of council about what the right outcome was. But in my mind, we do our best work when at the end we come together around a shared vision of how to move forward. So from my point of view, when we drafted an ordinance that set forth an initial vision for the CFO, we have compromised on several key cornerstone things based on conversations with the mayor and with Fred Miller and others, and a view of sort of sharing alternative visions and ultimately understanding that we had the same goal, but we had a different approach of how to get there. I think that's how we do our best work, and it took perhaps a little longer. Thanks very much to the outside group of experts who came in and gave us a roadmap. But I just want to acknowledge that while this particular vote seems anticlimactic because we don't have a room full of people testifying and we're not going to have a lengthy discussion, it's been the hard work that's gone into getting us here got us to a point where this council together feels comfortable moving forward, and I think we're about to do something which is vitally important to the long-term health, financial health of our city. And so I want to thank everyone who's brought us to this moment. The mayor, my colleagues, Fred Miller. And Fred has an interesting way of persuading people like me. He first tries the diplomacy and the charm and all that, then he comes in with a folder. No, but Fred, we appreciate the time you've spent, and because Fred occupies a independent position, Fred is never shy about fundamentally disagreeing with our view on things. Through that comes a better understanding of how to get to the same place, sometimes through a different route. And again, I think that's how we do our best work. So I want to acknowledge that, thank everybody, and I am pleased to vote aye.
Hales.
Well, this is a great piece of work, and Fred, thank you for all the effort you put into it. And again, we had some great outside counsel in the form of people that really understand big organizations, and I think it was a classic case of really pulling in that expertise, having somebody in-house who we really trust and rely on as an experienced public administrator, and then the council working together to come up with a good set of solutions. So I'm really happy about this whole body of work, and this is kind of the last piece of it, but very important. Aye. Okay, and roll call on 825, please.
Novick,
Aye.
Fritz.
I'm relieved and pleased that the City of Portland will have a Chief Financial Officer, Revenue and Finances Services Director in the near future. I think that the Bureau has had challenges, and certainly that this will be a good addition both to the accounting and to the budget process in partnership with the Budget Office. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Hales?
Aye. And then 826 passes to second reading. And then, did you read 827 earlier?
I did read the title,
Okay,
yes.
so now we have Andrew Scott here, and again, assisted by Celia for last-minute amendments, because we have some.
So very briefly, the city's financial management policies are a compilation of about a dozen different policies. As you know, the city's enjoyed over 30 years of a AAA bond rating, and I think in some part, because of the sound financial management we have, these policies being an element of them. That said, they were well overdue for a look at and a revision. And so we've got everything from budgeting to financial planning, reporting, debt management, et cetera. Over the last year, Office of Management and Finance and the City Budget Office have worked together, because when we were all in OMF, that was the joint responsibility. Now we've sort of said, Andrew, these are the CBOs to manage, and these are ours. And in a couple places, we have joint custody. So we've worked together. We also vetted them broadly, our proposed edits. We took input from city staff, financial staff, bureau directors, et cetera. And I think if our comments, their comments were either integrated, or at least we've cleared away the confusion. So it's been a good process. Very briefly, I'm going to speak to the OMF set of CFMPs, the financial policies, and Andrew will talk briefly about a couple in his portfolio. And really, most of the changes to the policies on the OMF side were really just shoring up best practices, updating technology. We have an electronic payment processing policy, and guess what? 8 years ago, it looked a lot different than best practices in the technology that we have now. We clarified some roles and responsibilities regarding to cash management, and clarified the responsibilities of bureaus to ensure the city's cash condition. I think maybe more important is the overview. We updated the overview of all the policies. We divided up the responsibilities, but we also added a point that said this council and city bureaus can seek clarification and request amendments or changes to these policies. Now, maybe you don't have to say it, but what we found in the process of opening up the policies and having bureaus look at it was an excellent learning experience for everyone. So the destination is not the only goal. The process of opening them up and looking at them and getting bureaus to really understand what's there is invaluable, and I think we'll see that played forward as we move through the accounting rules. There's two new policies. One is a pension funding policy, which on the surface isn't particularly dramatic. It sort of says we're going to pay what PERS tells us to pay, and we're going to pay FPDR. But it was in response to some changes in governmental accounting standards, where we're going to be looking at very different kind of bottom line in terms of what the city owes in pension liabilities. And so best practices indicated you really want to establish a pension funding policy so outsiders can see what the city is committed to covering, what they aren't. That's about as wonky as I'll get unless you have questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Andrew?
So, yeah, Andrew Scott, City Budget Director. And again, Celia explained sort of the process we've gone through, and given that vetting, I'll be very brief, but I did just want to touch on three specific things in here that I think are worth putting on the table during sort of the public conversation about this after this vetting process that we've just gone through. One of them has to do with some of the changes in Financial Policy 2.07. This is the city's reserve policy. And again, this is an extremely important policy, and as most of you know, we reserve 10% of the general fund. But we looked at that as part of this review process, and we wanted to make just a couple of updates. And the biggest update in there is actually to create some new triggers. And as you may recall, our reserve policy, first there's a primary trigger, which is that revenue growth needs to fall below 3%, either for prior 2 consecutive quarters or prospectively if it's in the forecast. That's sort of the primary trigger that needs to be met. In addition, one of 3 triggers needed to be met for council, again, to sort of be able to access that reserve. And I would remind you, we haven't ever accessed that reserve since it was created, but it does provide a cushion and a safety net in some really extreme circumstances if we were to need it. But when we looked at those triggers, they were out of date. And so we really wanted to make some more relevant triggers to things that impact the city. And specifically, we wanted to create triggers that capture the transitions, because some of those, the old triggers were levels of unemployment. and levels of property tax delinquency, and they didn't necessarily capture the transitions, which is really the most important thing when you're looking at a negative fiscal situation. And the other, we also wanted to tie those triggers more closely to the city's revenue stream. So the three new triggers that we've come up with, the first one is that local housing prices would need to fall by more than 10% at any time during a 2-year period. The second is that year-over-year change in the unemployment rate for the city of Portland rises by more than 2 percentage points at any time in 1 year. So again, instead of saying it has to be above a certain level, saying it has to rise by 2 percentage points within a 12-month period. And the final one is that year-over-year metro area employment, if it falls by at least 2% at any time during a 12-month period. Those are the three triggers proposed. And I do have one amendment. We found one, even though it has gone through at least a dozen or more reviews. There is a typo that we'd like to correct. The third trigger, as it currently reads, is year-over-year growth in metro area employment, and really that's intended to just be year-over-year metro area employment in total. So
removing the words growth and
growth in, right. So it just becomes year-over-year metro area employment. So council's amenable to
I'll
that.
move that amendment.
Second.
And any discussion about putting that amendment on the table? Then roll call on that, please.
Novick,
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Hales.
Aye. Okay, that's corrected.
Andrew, just one question. So the city has a AAA credit rating. People are always surprised to hear the Water Bureau has a AAA credit rating. But what we know from that is it means third-party rating agencies say that we do our business in a prudent way, setting aside proper reserves, raising revenue with necessary, making investments. The thing we often get asked, particularly during the down cycles, is why aren't we rating that money and investing in worthy causes? Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons is we don't want to jeopardize our credit rating. And in 3 sentences, could you just identify what the things that you'd be most concerned about losing if our credit rating was ever downgraded? What the implication for the city is?
Oh, well, yeah, and this is more a question for our Debt and Treasury Department, but it would have significant cost impacts on the city. All of our borrowing would become more expensive. So really a very significant impact to lose that credit rating. I mean, and I would say, Commissioner, in terms of using those reserves, that's right. One of the major concerns is making sure we don't lose that AAA credit rating. You know, another issue with those reserves, when you're talking about economic downturns, and we learned this now as part of the Great Recession, and actually, you know, some national groups, government finance officers and others are really looking at that historical experience. Cities that use their reserves didn't end up any better, and in many cases ended up worse than cities that didn't. And the reason for that is when you're looking at a systemic downturn, it's really important to get out ahead of that and make the necessary reductions, because you don't know when that recession is going to end. If you could forecast the recession will end in 10 months and revenues will pick back up, well, that's a great time to go ahead and bridge that with one-time funds. But we never know, and in fact, in 2008, we were thinking, well, maybe it would last a year. Well, it ended up lasting significantly longer in terms of our revenue impact. So those reserves are actually much more useful for natural disasters and emergencies, which again, half of our reserve is set aside for. And those economic downturns, we need to just be really careful about when we tap those.
If I could, Andrew, let me just use a homey metaphor. Many of us go in and seek financing for a car or for a mortgage. And one of the most more important piece of information that banks consider when they think about extending you credit is what your credit score is. And the lower your score, the higher the interest rate they'll charge you. They'll give you the money, but they'll make you pay more for it if you're seen as a risk. And that's sort of a hidden tax. If we jeopardize our credit rating because we're using money that we should hold aside, then it's going to end up costing us more to do all the borrowing we do, and it ends up coming back and hurting the very people we're trying to serve. So thank God it looks like we're heading into a better cycle, but I think it's good to remind people that there is a consequence to rating that money, and it could come at the cost of our stellar credit rating.
So the second policy I just wanted to draw your attention to is 2.03. And again, there are a number of things in here, most of which are minor, but this is actually where we also deal with operations and maintenance, and particularly O&M for new assets that are coming online. And so one of the things, what we've tried to do in terms of updating this policy is really to clarify and hopefully simplify the process by which bureaus can request and receive O&M for new assets. And we've had some conversations on council over the last year about this. And really what these changes are intended to do is make sure that a funding plan is in place for the maintenance of new assets, and that bureaus that do require new general fund resources when they're bringing on a new asset, whether it's a park or some other asset, that they have some certainty that the resources are going to be allocated once that asset goes into service, and that council has clarity on what the cumulative out-year impact is of their asset decisions. So very briefly, the changes here. Every year, bureaus are going to be asked as part of their 5-year CIP to estimate what the O&M is for everything that's in that CIP. And as you may know with your bureaus, a lot of the things in the out years are not things that will necessarily happen. They may be aspirational. But even those aspirational ideas, we'd like the bureau just to do a rough estimate. And we understand it'll be a low confidence estimate to say, if we were to get this investment and move forward, this is a rough estimate of what the O&M might be. What we then are also asking is that CalTarget changes, instead of being on sort of a one-off basis, will be done as part of the budget process, and we'll do those prospectively. So everything that a bureau expects to contract for in the upcoming year, as part of the budget process, they'll bring a decision package that says, okay, we're expecting to go forward with 4 new parks, and we think the O&M on each one is $25,000. And thus, we're bringing forward a decision package for $100,000. And council gets to then consider that as part of the budget process, and prospectively then give parks the certainty to say, yes, we agree that you should move forward with this, and we're going to build that into the forecast and into your budget. And we can then offset that on a one-time basis, depending on how long it takes. I mean, it may take a year, it may take 3 years for those parks to come online, but we know with certainty that that's in the forecast and that it's in the budget and that the money's available and at that time.
So, Andrew, it sounds like a laudable goal, but we also know from the last 3 or 4 years we've had big disagreements about what the O&M number ultimately should be. Bureau comes up with a number. You've often scrubbed it,
right?
And then you sort of look at assumptions. So I'm concerned here that we want to set clear public expectations. Mayor the other day, I thought, made a great comment that perhaps some of the estimates our engineers are making about high confidence estimates about the cost of construction need to be revised in light of the fact that we have a robust economy and bids are coming in well above what we're estimating because there's a capacity problem in the system. So people are saying, yeah, we'll do your work, but we're going to charge you more for it. Contrary to what happened during the recession when we got great bids because people were lucky that we were glad to have the work. So without wanting to sound snarky about this, how do we keep the politics out of the setting of the O&M, and what will be the role of the Bureau and your office in coming up with a number?
So we've actually built into the procedures, the proposed procedures, a true-up process once the facility is actually online. So you could imagine, parks coming in with a low confidence estimate early on in the process and saying, well, we think it'll be $25,000. And council says, great, move forward with that. We'll make sure that money's available. They'll come back with their contract. At the end of that process, through a number of changes, maybe council's added some additional things to the park or some, asked for some additional programming or other things, and the O&M ends up being $50,000, we would have a true-up process where parks would be able to essentially true that up. The same would go the other way. To the extent that they estimated something and the actual O&M ended up being lower, we would, again, as part of that review process later, be able to go back in and say, okay, it wasn't really $25,000, it was really $20,000 a year, so we're gonna true that up as well.
And just remind me, as I think Dan was the author of the ordinance, is capital spending in parks the only area where we by ordinance require that the O&M be set aside at?
No, and this policy applies to all bureaus. Parks is the
currently.
Yeah, it currently applies to all bureaus and will continue. I'm using parks as an example because they're the most frequent user of this. But as actually I think Commissioner Fritz has pointed out, there are some other examples of other bureaus that didn't, actually as part of bringing a new asset online, either consider the O&M or they didn't get an increase for it. And we want to make sure that consistently bureaus are both estimating what that O&M is and then making sure that the resources are available if council wants to move forward so that we're not stuck with some of the examples we currently have of that lack of O&M. So it does apply to all and I should say it applies to all bureaus to estimate the O&M. The policy is focused on general fund, additional general fund needs because, of course, non-general fund bureaus would fund it within their own resources.
It's just foreshadowing. I hope this doesn't lead to endless debates about O&M in order to get to council members being comfortable about voting for the CIP package, that whatever number you give us just for the purpose of our debate discussion becomes the placeholder number. Because I think what we understand is that one or more council members may not support a CIP investment because it comes with an O&M they don't think we can afford right now. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just really important that whatever the O&M number that comes to us doesn't become a debating point. This is what we estimate, and if someone wants to vote against that capital expenditure because they don't think we should incur the O&M, it should be based on the number that you give to us.
And I see this revised policy as helping in that, and that the question is asked up front, are you going to fund it? rather than at the end when we've already got the facility done. I
remember
would
when-
ask, though, in the utility bureaus, would the projection of the O&M be part of their capital investment list? And
Yes,
so
yes. And those bureaus, I mean, they already do this, but again, they would be expected to under this policy as
it
well.
might be helpful to make sure that it's teased out for the Budget Advisory Committee before they approve the CIP, to make sure that the Citizen Advisory Committee understands, just like the council would understand, that there will be a cost to bringing a particular, wastewater treatment plant or whatever it might be online, and that the Budget Advisory Committee is also buying into, yes, we're willing to raise the rates to do that.
Well, I'm not sure if I followed your question, Commissioner Fish, or if the language captures the difference, but this does apply to all bureaus. There are capital facilities that we elect to build where the operating cost is variable, or more variable than others. That is, we build a new community center or a new pool, depending on the hours and the rates charged, it has an O&M cost that moves around.
Right.
Build a new fire station, and we staff it with a single engine crew. We got a very firm idea of what that's going to cost right out of the gate. So I assume, the policy applies in both cases, right? You build a new fire station, you get a Cal Target increase for the assumed staffing level for that fire station. You build a new community center, we're going to assume a Cal Target increase based on what you say you're going to do with that pool and how much you say you're going to collect in revenue, right?
Yes, and I think, I think you're right, there are variable O&M estimates, and bureaus deal with those cycles currently within their existing budget. So, I mean, to the extent there were savings, they'd be able to capture that. To the extent there are new needs, they might come in and ask for that money, but you provide that sort of base level of funding in both cases. Yeah.
I guess all I'm foreshadowing there is that we could end up front-loading big debates about O&M that are based on assumptions. And I remember the hearing where Commissioner Novick raised a principal concern about this policy, and to put it, just think about it in another context, it's sort of like he wanted to go out and buy the TV, but he didn't like the fact that there was a maintenance contract that was associated with the TV that he had to buy as well, and he didn't want to make that decision implicit in just buying the TV. So now we're saying we're going to highlight the O&M that attaches to the capital investment. But just the one concern I have is that we've had big debates about what is the appropriate O&M. In fire, we've had commissioners in charge who would have said you want 100 firefighters at that station. So that becomes not just an O&M issue, that's a big policy question. And I'm hoping we can get just baseline O&M numbers so we don't spend a lot of time debating that in advance of the asset coming online. In other words, a reasonable way of guesstimating that doesn't front load policy debates that are not really germane to that question. And I see this as more of a sunshine issue about knowing what we're going to what obligations we're taking on that impact the general fund, but not just creating an endless source of debates about what ought to be the O&M that attaches.
And I think what you're raising are those level of service questions, which are appropriate for any budget process. And that's true of new assets. It's true of existing assets. At any time, council could ask questions about the level of service in any asset, whether it should be higher or lower, and make the necessary adjustments. And I think so. I agree. I mean, we can provide sort of that estimate of what the O&M will be given certain assumptions, and then make the decision about the assets. Council at any time can come back and make changes in terms of that overall level of service.
And if that's spelled out, then when we're voting on it, we can say, I'm supporting this on the assumption that the operational costs are going to be X based on the description I've heard today about what is going to be done with the facility. And if the description of what's going to be done with the facility changes, then I haven't made a commitment to fund those operational costs.
Or you get a second bite the apple, Commissioner, where in the bump or at some point you say, well, there's an extra $10,000 that was not anticipated. We can debate whether that comes out of the Bureau's budget or is a supplemental.
Right. I mean, we can always do that. I thought you were sort of addressing the question of when it's uncertain as to what the facility will really be. Yeah. And there, hopefully, if we have an idea of what it will be, we'll have a reasonably decent idea of what it will cost. And if it's not, I mean, if we don't really know what it'll be, then we won't know what the costs are to begin with.
I agree.
The very last item I just wanted to draw attention to is Financial Policy 2.06 having to do with revenue. And again, there are a number of changes here, but specifically drawing attention to the carryover of excess revenue. And I think what we're trying to do is bring the policy in line with, I think, what the original intent was. What the existing policy says is that bureaus are allowed to carry over any excess revenue above budget. And I think the intent always was carry over any excess revenue above costs. Because again, what to the extent a bureau brings in excess revenue above the cost of running that program, what this says is, yes, you can go ahead and carry that over in your bureau and use it in the following fiscal year. What we didn't want to get into was an artificially low budget and then collecting additional revenue and having that carry over, because again, that requires a general fund subsidy. So this is bringing that policy into, I think, what the intent always was of the policy, but making that really clear. But that is a change in terms of how we've treated bureaus the last couple of years. So.
Is there an example of during our budget that triggered this concern?
It was more as over the last couple of years, we've had a couple examples in more than one bureau. And again, it's nothing nefarious where they've said, oh yeah, we estimated, I'm going to make this up, $100,000 of revenue, budgeted $100,000 of revenue, but collected $150,000. We'd like to carry that over. And we went back and looked, and it actually ended up costing $150,000 to run that particular program. And we've sort of questioned, then, well, wait, if it cost you $150 and you raised $150, that means you spent that money, but they only budgeted $100,000. And so under the old policy, the Bureau was in fact entitled to carry that over. That meant the general fund picked up, subsidized that program, which again, for these revenue generating programs is not the intent. So this is intended to say, if you're able to collect a little bit of additional revenue above your costs, that's great. We actually want to encourage that. And we incentivize that by saying you can carry that over for a different purpose the following fiscal year. Actually, the purpose is related to that program, but you can reinvest in that program the following year. But we want to make sure we're not artificially subsidizing with general fund so that bureaus can carry that over.
So if Commissioner Fritz collects more revenue because more people are using community centers, under this policy, parks would still be able to carry that over and keep it within their budget?
Yeah, if it's above the cost of running those community centers, yes, it would need to go back again to the program where it was generated from, but that's what we would do anyway. So.
I think this is a very impressive body of work. And is there somebody on your staff who was particularly involved in this, or have you done it all together?
Well, we've worked very closely with OMF. Jeremy Patton on my staff really took lead on this, and it's been you said a year. I think it's been two. Hasn't it? 3?
It's been a
It's been a long time.
It's very impressive.
Yeah, so.
Just on the details, I'm very happy to see that you go with shall rather than will. We had that discussion before, but so that does my heart good. I wanted to draw to the council's attention on page 6 that we're deleting the practice from the budget monitoring process that the infrastructure maintenance projects to be considered for funding with excess balance will be projects that were requested but not funded in the previous year's budget, and projects that are underway but still require funding. I very much support taking that out because I believe that as things come up, we shouldn't be limited to that. And also, I think it tended to have bureaus suggest things in the budget that they didn't think were going to get funded, just to be sure that they were on the list to get funded in any excess. So I appreciate that. I do have a question on page 9 under review of council actions. You're deleting the last sentence of that paragraph that says the fiscal impact statement will be available in the auditor's office website in the council filing documents section. Why is that deleted? I apologize that I did not raise that
First he
earlier.
builds you up, now look what he's doing.
Now
you're throwing
put
you
him right
under
on the
bus.
spot, yeah.
Well, I was actually trying to find that previous section that I read about the ongoing projects, and then I saw that and hadn't
I
previously
think
noticed
you ought to
it.
just
so.
write the auditor an apology letter, and we'll just get past this right now.
It may have just been moved, but I want to make sure that the
Relocated.
fiscal
Assume
impact
it's 'cause it's
statement is
relocated.
available to the public as well as to
Probably
council.
renumbered somewhere.
Reporting.
As an aside, as you're looking for it, it would be helpful to get it a little earlier than last thing on Tuesday as well.
Here you go. It's on Exhibit A, page 14, I think. Well, maybe that's reports.
Yeah, that
Actually-
doesn't seem to be quite the
Because
same
we're
thing to me.
responsible for holding, I think, the fiscal impacts under the regulations basically saying that we need to have copies of the fiscal impact statements available, I think is our policy, basically saying CBO is responsible for keeping the fiscal impact statements, not the auditor's office.
Yeah.
So I think it's just clarifying that role.
Yeah, and we do post it on CBO's webpage now, and so I think, again, this was just deleting that requirement, just because we didn't want to post it on the auditor's
The
webpage, it's on
auditor's
our
office
CBO webpage.
Well, actually, I think it would be better traveling with the item. Because a citizen who's looking through the agenda on Tuesday and trying to figure out what it means is not necessarily going to know that they need to go to the city budget office to look for the fiscal impact statement.
I think, and I'm certainly open to that. This is, Jeremy's pointing out, this is one of those changes I think we might have made a year or two ago, so we're trying to sort of go back.
Right.
I would say that I think where we post it probably is not appropriate to have in policy anyway. So I think actually I would argue that striking it is fine, but let's have that conversation. And actually we can add a procedure or add it to the procedures in terms of where we should post it. And again, we do have authority, the budget director does have authority to make changes to procedures, not policy.
Right.
So to the extent we can have that conversation about where you think it belongs and make sure that gets established in a procedure.
Or perhaps when we give you the ability to make administrative rules, that could be one of them that you might not necessarily need to give to
Is
the
that,
whole
would that
council.
be, that wouldn't be burdensome to have it on the auditor's thing and yours, would it?
No, we would want to make sure it's posted in one place and linked somewhere else.
I agree
Yeah.
with Commissioner Fritz. There's
Makes
just the
sense.
ease of convenient. People go to the auditor's office, no disrespect to your website. I think they.
I
they
love
tend
our
to
website, but
Go
that's
to the
okay.
auditor's website because they have the agenda, and to have that there just means,
I think it's currently on the auditor's website, and I don't think we actually even have it on the CBO website. It's all about the records retention, I think, is, and this might even, I want to say it might have came from the auditor's office, just saying that they're not required under record retention rules to keep it, and we're actually required to keep that, and it might have just been removing that so it doesn't look like they're required to do it.
Well, I think I
But-
agree with Director Scott that it doesn't necessarily need to be in this policy as long as it happens.
We'll follow up on where
Yeah.
it should be and
Thank you.
make sure that happens.
Okay. Other questions for the team? Anyone sign up to speak on this resolution?
No one signed up
Okay,
for any of
anyone want to
these.
speak? Then I think we might be ready for a roll call on the resolution.
827, Novick?
Thank you very much for all the hard work. And like Commissioner Fritz, I appreciate the restoration of the word shall. Aye.
I think we have a majority of the council who's thoroughly in the pro-shall camp, so that's good to know for future reference. But that aside, it's a very impressive body of work and very sensible policies. You read it through and it's like, yeah, that should work. And knowing the good work that you've done, I'm very confident that you've found every little glitch, and if not, you'll bring it back to our attention. So thank you very much. Aye.
Fish?
prior to this hearing, it was my view that I will support it. After listening to this thoughtful exchange, I shall support it. Aye.
Hales?
Well, great work, and there are a lot of reasons, big and small, why we're a well-managed city. This is one more, so I appreciate the work. And then Commissioner Fritz, as long as you continue to spend a few weeks in England every summer, I'm sure that we will all continue to enjoy our affection for the word shall. Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move to 828 and 829.
828, establish rules for use of the Duckworth Dock moorage. And 829, amend cooperative agreement with the Oregon State Marine Board to restrict nighttime use of the Duckworth Dock except on certain days for a trial period of 1 year.
So as our team comes up, let me set the context for this. The Duckworth Dock formerly was known as the Convention Center Dock. The council named the dock in honor of our Trailblazer Center, Kevin Duckworth, who died of heart failure in 2008. It was funded by the Marine Board, envisioned as a place for water taxis, and for that idiosyncratic reason, the dock is considered a PBOT, or Bureau of Transportation facility, though I think PBOT would be the first to say that the recreational facilities are not the core of their mission. The ordinances that we're going to look at today provide a new strategy for managing the dock. Greg Jones and Andrew Carlson from PBOT are here. We also, I think, want to make sure we thank some folks, particularly Sheriff Dan Staton and Lieutenant Travis Goldberg of the River Patrol. They have gone to some considerable effort to help us manage this shared public space in a reasonable and sane way. And also, I know Nate Takara, our fire marshal, is here, and the harbor master reports to him. Appreciate their good work as well. So this has been an inter-bureau effort to try to manage a public space that is a scarce resource and an important part of how Portlanders connect to the river. So with that, I'll turn it over to the two of you and take it from there.
Good afternoon, Mayor Hales, City Council. Andrew Karlstrom. I'm the Peabody Employee Services Division Manager, and I'll give you the information for both 828 and 829. Item 828 provides the city with enforcement rules and mechanisms to provide enforcement at the Duckworth Dock, again, which is anticipated to be provided by the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. Item 828 adds new code sections to Title 19, which is harbors, and the 5 areas that we would like to highlight briefly in the proposed code are: 1, the code, and as well as the amendment to the agreement in 829, specifies that overnight moorage of up to 72 hours is only allowed on weekends from Friday noon to Monday noon, from the weekend prior to Memorial Day to the weekend after Labor Day. 2, overnight mooring will be prohibited during the remainder of the year. 3, the proposed code also provides the PBOT director with authority to enter into agreements for enforcement by designated persons in charge with the Sheriff's Office and other agencies. 4, the code provides the PBOT director the authority to issue administrative rules and establish fees. And 5, the code provides provisions for exclusions, which is a necessary mechanism for the Sheriff's Office to provide enforcement at the dock. Item 829 provides an amendment to the city's existing agreement with the Oregon State Marine Board regarding this dock for a trial period of 1 year. And again, the amendment has the same provisions regarding overnight moorage, and the agreement mirrors the code. The agreement amendment will be in effect for a 1-year trial period, and during this period, the city will collect relevant information and report to the Oregon State Marine Board. In addition, at the end of the 1-year period, the city and the Marine Board will evaluate the trial and determine whether the restrictions will remain. And at that time, the city may request a permanent rule change in the agreement. And finally, if the city's agreement with the Marine Board is not extended after the 1-year trial period, the city code in item 828 would need to be amended.
Great, thank you. Greg, anything to add?
Just that the dock was built at the same time we did the Steel Bridge pedestrian walkway, and the Esplanade was under construction. And it was seen both as a recreational service to boaters, but primarily it was as planned as a part of a river taxi system that never came about. So what we set in place was for commercial use of that dock, and what we have now is a dock without rules. So we're moving towards a system where we're implementing rules similar to the Parks Bureau rules of the remainder of the docks along the river.
I understand that Uber is hoping to introduce a water taxi model in the Pacific Northwest sometime soon, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from that anytime.
The email just came in this afternoon.
Tax it.
That's right, we'll tax that too. All right, any other questions for our staff team? And then if the Sheriff's River Patrol would like to speak, or if we have public testimony, if anyone signed up to speak on this, but you got anyone signed up, Carla?
Yes, did you have somebody else first? Okay, yeah, I've got public testimony.
Okay.
I had 2 sheets. I have Lightning and Steve Whittier on 828.
Okay,
You want to come up first?
come on up. Thanks, you guys. We'll stand by if you have other questions.
Yes, my name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Think Lab. One of the issues I have on this, it's amazing to me that this is not considered for recreational use originally. I find that interesting. They would say water taxis, and I'd like to ask anybody, how many do you see out on the river right now? One of the concerns I have is that what we're seeing here is that this is really being put into place for people that don't have enough money to maybe stay in a marina and tie their boat up. And what you predominantly see at this location is people that they would consider maybe homeless type boaters, people that don't have a place to stay. So now they're going to limit their use here, and basically they'll be dropping their anchors out in the river, and then they'll be told at a certain amount of time that they need to relocate within 5 miles from that location. So they're doing a real good job of cleaning out the people that really need the help the most out on the river. Another concern I have is that when boats come into this location, are they going to lock the gate currently at a certain time so they can't access back to the boats? And when the boats are left there, I assume they're going to give proper notice. And then when they're considered derelict, they're probably going to want to take those boats, dispose of them, and then pay the taxpayers or have the taxpayers fund for that disposal of the boats, whether if they sink or not. So I have some environmental issues on this too, and I always have a problem with Multnomah County River Patrol on the coordination with the City of Portland. In my opinion, I think that Multnomah County River Patrol should be taken over by the City of Portland. And some people may disagree with me on that, but I think that needs to really be looked at very close. Some of the largest overtime hours were attributed to the Multnomah County River Patrol and Suicide Watch. But if you look at River Patrol, a lot of the overtime hours were toward that location. And I would like to see the city take that over. I would like to see the city have an oversight committee on the Multnomah County River Patrol on what they actually do out on the river, have reports provided, and have a close look to see exactly what is happening, because I really think the City of Portland should take a real aggressive and close look at that and take control of it, because I think we're going to have some changes on that levee. We might see them being completely moved out of there. New Orleans, it costs to rebuild that levee close to $18 billion. We're going to see a price tag on this levee along Marine Drive that is going to make people just, their eyes are going to open. And I think they're going to remove a lot of properties through there. And I think it's going to be Multnomah County River Patrol, a lot of those properties down through there. And I think the City of Portland needs to get ready and adjust and take that division over. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Witter. I'm a resident of Portland. I'm a frequent recreational boat user and fisherman on the river, and love to get out and really like the idea of public facilities on the river that folks can use. I'd like to commend the authors of this ordinance for actually returning this facility back to the recreational users as I see it. I had an experience back in 2013 due to the fact that it seems like there are lots of kind of permanent boat residents at this facility. I was out boating with my family one day, and we had a little minor issue with our equipment. And we were cruising downtown, and we thought the Duckworth Dock would be the perfect place to stop off and make that repair. It was fairly early in the morning. As we decided to stop there, just right before we got there, we noticed that there were lots of boats that seemed to be permanently docked up there, very little room to have access to get to the dock. And it looked like most of the boats were in sort of derelict condition. As we tied up, it seemed like people in the boats were starting to rise and shine. They were in various states of dress, sort of taking care of morning hygiene and all the things you would expect every one of us to do. And just that made me and my wife, and especially my young son, very, very uncomfortable and sort of leery of actually using the facility. I don't want you to think that I'm intolerant and insensitive of folks with housing issues, and actually honor everybody's rights to use public facilities as long as those public facilities are truly public. And at that point, that dock felt like I was trespassing in someone's home or a place where I belong. So because of the convenience of that dock, we were able to make our repairs and get underway, and I haven't been back to that dock since. I suppose I really support the proposed ordinance in redefining the hours and the use, and especially the interagency enforcement aspect of it. So with that, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Carl, do you have others?
For 829, I also had Lightning and Mr. Whittier. You're good? Okay, and then Joe Walsh.
Okay.
slow. For the record, my name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. One of the fears that we have is that, again, we're going to see the solution to the problem is to kick people out, move them along, go down the road, get away from this dock. We have nice people coming to use this dock. You just heard it. We always have these stories of people walking on the street being hassled by the homeless. Now we have the docks. There were recent stories in the newspapers about people living on their boats. Our fear is that's what this is about. That we now have to take our intolerance off the streets to the river and make sure those people on those derelict boats don't dirty up the river. Don't make it intolerable for me and my wife to go and fix our boat. There are other solutions. It's not an either-or problem. You know, when people whine about the homeless and they whine about people using and living on their boats, come with a solution. Just offer a solution. We do. You don't pay any attention to it. You keep giving it to the nonprofits and spending millions of dollars and then bragging about it, but do nothing except get caught in the process. You hire new people. So you're going to make more rules on the river. Go ahead. You're heading for a wall, people. You're going to run into a wall. Thank you for your time and attention.
Okay. Anyone else? Then let's take a roll call first on 828.
Now, before we do that, could you just, I know that you have been looking into alternative places for people to go who are living on boats. Can you give us an update on that?
Jillian, if that's something, Jillian Detweiler on my staff's been working on this issue, so she might be able to talk about that.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
There's a regular meeting now, actually convened by the mayor's office. By the governor's office, to talk about transient voters. The direction now seems to be to remain consistent with the priorities that Portland has established for solving homelessness, directing resources to homeless populations. And that means outreach to people on boats. Right now, the group does not seem to be leaning toward acquiring a marina or some sort of facility for transient boaters, but trying to do outreach to people and help them into housing on land.
But there's a problem because we don't have enough housing. So where are folks supposed to dock if they can't dock here?
Well, they can't anchor in the river. They can anchor in the river.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jillian. Okay, let's take a roll call.
Novick?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Hales?
I think it's important to remember that although there's a complicated interagency effort underway here, and I appreciate it, that actually I think Mr. Witter's testimony really highlighted this. The way the Marine Board finances these projects is they charge recreational boaters a license fee every year. This isn't the only dock of its kind. There are docks all over the river system. And it's simply a fee for service. You pay your registration fee. The Marine Board takes your money and builds docks that you use. It's pretty much of a perfect ratepayer system for those that register their boats. So I think that's a sound system, and this was a unique situation in that it was built for a purpose that didn't materialize, water taxis, and then I think rightly needs to revert to that understanding with boat owners that you pay your registration fee, you get to access docks whether they're on Government Island or out in front of St. Helens or here in downtown Portland. So I think there's a lot of justice in the way this system works. Aye. And on the second one, please.
Novick?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
You know, Mayor, just your comments reminds me that Senator Dingfelder worked with the city a few years ago on the other side of the ledger on the point you made, which was we were trying to get a no-wake zone. And because the Marine Board represents the interest just of the motorized community at that time, they didn't see the virtue of a no-wake zone.
Right.
And there was no representative of canoes and non-motorized boats. And Jackie worked on that. And I actually think the composition of the board has now changed to reflect a broader, but to your point, I think still stands that it is, people are taxed and services are provided. But there was an ideological problem we ran into on the no-wake zone
Right.
when we wanted to protect sensitive habitat in the Willamette, and Jackie was enormously helpful when she was, I think, a committee chair. So another great reason that you hired her. So I have that expertise. Aye.
Hales?
Well, if you visited Ms. Detweiler's office yet, you'll notice that she cut a photo out of a story about babies learning to swim, a baby that's been thrown into a pool and is swimming with a funny look on his face, or her face. I think it's a him. So we threw Jillian into the pool not long after her arrival on my team here in this office and said, take on this complicated Byzantine intergovernmental issue, and she's done a great job, and I appreciate it. Good work. Aye. Okay, 8:30.
Authorize contracts as required with 8 service firms for right-of-way appraisal and acquisition and relocation projects that are funded through federal aid.
I understand you have a request to pull this and return it to your
Yes, we
office. Unless there's objection, we'll return that to Commissioner Novick's office. And what do we have after that?
Mayor, I think we can get the BES stuff done in under 2 hours.
Okay, 8:31.
Vacate a portion of Southeast Grand Avenue, subject to certain conditions and reservations.
Roll call, please.
Novick?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Hales?
Aye. 8:32.
Authorize a contract and provide for payment for the construction of the Lower Slough Refugia Habitat Enhancement Project number E10176 for $2,016,000.
Commissioner Fish.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll try to run briskly through all 3 matters. This item deals with our obligation by permit to protect endangered fish species. And here to walk us through this is Lloyd Stawning, supervising engineer, and Fred McGregor, project manager. Gentlemen, who would like to start?
I'll speak.
Okay.
Commissioners, Mr. Mayor, good afternoon. I am Lloyd Stawning. With me is Mr. McGregor. We're here to talk about the Lower Columbia Slough Refuge project. The project is developed as part of our ESA program. In 1998, salmon were identified in the ESA program, and shortly thereafter, the City of Portland adopted policies to try and develop protection for salmonid species. This project is part of that program. There we go. Excellent. Yeah, there we go. Program goals and objectives are to improve in-stream habitat for benefit of native fish communities, improve wetland and riparian areas, to partner with private property owners for increased shade, to reduce temperature on the slough, to improve food for macroinvertebrates, and lastly, to provide nesting habitat for western painted turtles. The primary mechanism we're going to use for that is this, large woody debris. Rivers typically have woody debris along the banks, and that's often not very common in urban streams, and so we're going in and trying to actually install that ourselves. The mechanism here is, this is a typical schematic. It sort of looks like the pickup sticks of the gods, but it's actually an anchoring system. We put in some wood, and then we pin the wood down with metal pins and chains to secure it to the anchors. And
It actually looks to me like a piece of public art that's now placed next to the Multnomah County offices.
This looks better, I think.
Wait a second, that's an award-winning piece of art, Mayor.
Yeah, well, it's in the eye of the beholder.
surprising level of creativity amongst our staff. This is actually the second project that we've used on this. The first project was also on the Lower Columbia Slough. It was done near Kelly Point Park. And so this is our second try at this. Highlighting the importance of the large woody debris, smaller fish, juvenile salmonids, like to hide underneath these logs, and so it's shelter from predators, it's territory for them, and then it's also a food source for macroinvertebrates. We're doing this along two areas. The first is the Ramsey Reach, which is approximately in the area where the St. John's landfill would be. It runs about 4,100 feet along the slough. We're not putting wood along all 4,100 feet, obviously. We're putting it at about 35 locations. There'll be about 650 logs total, if my memory is correct. And the second one is around Wright and Moore Islands. We'll be putting large woody debris around the perimeters. Okay. To summarize, we're providing refuge habitat for juvenile salmonids, part of the food web for macroinvertebrates. We're providing nesting habitat for predated turtles. We're improving water quality through reduction of sediments and increased shade. And then we're working to try and meet our ESA and our Clean Water Act commitments, as well as our TMDL goals for the slough. And with that, I'll entertain questions.
Questions? Anyone?
How much money is in the Watershed Investment Fund?
I believe it's $1.5 million a year, my recollection.
So this is more than a year's allocation of it. How much is in the is it built up to this
We're
point?
getting a grant, I believe it's worth about $200,000 from the Oregon DEQ, and then we're getting some donations of wood from ODOT and one other organization.
Right, but it's still a $2 million project that we're approving today.
That's correct.
So that uses all the money for this year.
I'm not certain.
Do you know, does it all come from rates? Is there any general fund money in the Watershed Investment Fund?
No, it's part of the capital program.
It's rates. So do you have a list of what projects are going to be coming online with future projects? I mean, I'm just wondering that this seems like a large amount of money, and now I'm hearing it's pretty much an entire year's budget. What's the thinking of putting this particular something here versus doing smaller projects throughout the?
We do a series of projects. We get an allocated budget every year for the work.
We'd be happy to. Would it be helpful if we gave you a snapshot of some of projects in the queue and some maybe a 5-year forecast of where we expect to be spending money? The reason, by the way, you asked a great question. The reason we're using ratepayer dollars here is that this is a requirement of getting our permits, and our permits then allow us to perform functions that are core to our mission. So this is, we're required to do this.
And I know that you've spent the last 14 months digging into what BES does and how it does it, and especially scrubbing the budgets to look into where the money comes from and how is it spent. So no, I don't necessarily need to. We were just interested in the size of this particular project and wondering, when things come to me to vote on, I really don't know whether it should be $2,016,000 or whether it should be, $5 million or $1 million or whatever it is. And so I'm just interested to know generally, and maybe that's a conversation we can have in one of our meetings, Commissioner Fish, to get a little.
Actually, it's a great question. I think we could get some short answers from staff to follow up with commissioners, and then you and I can talk about it further.
They almost should do trainings for new council members about, this is the kinds of questions that you should, I feel like it's a question I should have asked 5.5 years ago, and so I appreciate your indulgence, and it looks like a good project.
Other questions, comments? This is going to pass to second reading, but I just want to say I had the chance this weekend to participate in the annual Columbia Slough Regatta on the upper slough. And hadn't been on that reach of the slough in a while, and it's really interesting to see, over probably 10-year gap there, how much improvement in the habitat has been created by the the corpus of these projects. You know, there's one in this section this year, and there's one in another section some other year, and you add that up over time, and in terms of the water quality of the slough and the natural environment there and its capacity to deal with stormwater, all the above, it's pretty impressive. You know, again, not being there for 10 years, having that long a period in between two viewings of the same section, is pretty dramatic. So each one of these projects adds up over time, and this looks like a good one. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks very much.
Excuse me, there's an amendment to this one?
Oh, yeah, that's right. We do have an amendment, don't we, Commissioner?
We have an amendment, Carla.
Correct the source of funds.
Thank you. It almost escaped Commissioner Novick's attention. Sorry. I move the amendment.
The amendment is to correct the source of budgeted funds. Is there a second?
Second.
And a roll call on substituting the amendment.
Novick?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Hales?
Aye. Is there anyone who wants to speak on this item? Then it passes to second reading. Thanks very much. Okay, now 8:33. Stick around if this is your project, but it looks like you've got another team coming up for it.
Paul and Dan.
Okay, 8:33, please.
Authorize a contract and provide payment for construction of the Southwest Ventilation and Capacity Improvements Project number E10121 for $2,700,000.
Commissioner Fish?
Mayor and colleagues, let me introduce Paul Sudo, Supervising Engineer, and Dan Hebert, Senior Engineer, BES Wastewater Group. This item provides authorization for procurement services to execute a construction contract with the lowest responsive bidder for the work. This particular project will improve the capacity of the sewer system and reduce odors in an area of Southwest Portland near Southwest Virginia Avenue and Taylor's Ferry Road. Paul and Dan are here to make a brief presentation, answer your questions. Gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Paul Sudo, Supervising Engineer for the Bureau, and this is Dan Hebert. I am just having some technical difficulties.
Carla, yeah, give him a hand
Why
with.
should you be any different than anyone else?
Yeah, everyone has
After all,
technical.
we have done a technology upgrade.
Yeah, it's equal opportunity. Difficult system.
I don't know if my slideshow is here. I think that's the problem.
Do you have it on a thumb drive or something?
I do have it on a thumb drive. Always good to have a backup. Okay, sorry for the delay.
Great. No problem.
So this is just a brief overview of this project. It's essentially a sewer improvement project and odor control project in our collection system. There are two map locations here. The one on the left shows a general location. You can see the Willamette River. It's on southwest Portland, and it's just west of Macadam Boulevard there. That kind of parallels the river. And on the right, you can see more of a detail there. The black box shows the ventilation facility that will be located, and the dashed lines are essentially the sewer improvement portion of the project. So it's kind of split between Southwest Taylor's Ferry Road, and then it turns off onto Southwest Virginia. And it's a mix of some pipe lining and then in-kind or wholesale pipe replacement. So on the ventilation side, as far as the driver, BES frequently receives odor complaints along the alignment of the Southwest Parallel Interceptor and the Burlingame Trunk Sewer. The ventilation improvements will provide a permanent odor treatment facility in the vicinity of Southwest Taylor's Ferry Road and Southwest Virginia Avenue. And the flow capacity portion of the project, Southwest Parallel Interceptor, is near the intersection of Southwest Taylor's Ferry Road and Southwest Virginia Avenue, and that basically needs to be upgraded for capacity issues. That's current and also for projected future peak flows. The capacity improvements include installing a parallel 24-inch sewer line in Southwest Taylor's Ferry Road from Stevens Creek to Southwest Virginia Avenue, and approximately 800 feet of 48-inch sewer along Southwest Virginia Avenue. The estimated construction contract cost is $2.7 million, and it has advertised for construction at the end of July. The bids open on August 19th, and based on that advertising schedule, the construction is anticipated to begin in November of 2014 and finish up right around November, basically a year later in November of 2015.
How does that fit in with the completion of the Selwood Bridge and the improvements in Macadam on that?
I am not familiar with the Selwood Bridge completion, but I think it's expected to be done around that time.
So it would be good to look into that because I know that there's currently some circulation that's in that area.
That's a good
and
point.
to make sure that we have some ways to get
The traffic control part of it,
yeah.
is that right?
Well,
Yeah.
not just the traffic control, but if there's a way to coordinate some of the digging up of the road or to avoid having two roads dug up at the same time or two areas dug up at the same time.
Very good point, and to avoid the scenario that always makes us wince where we dig up new pavement. So there's a whole bunch of temporary circulation that they put in place for that bridge in this vicinity.
Yeah.
They're going to be done when they're done. I'm not sure what their project schedule is, but a scenario in which we do the trench work and then pave is obviously the one that we're looking for here.
And just one comment on that. I'm Dan Hebert, the senior engineer. The sewer designers on the project did spend quite a bit of time coordinating with the bridge construction management crew and other projects in the vicinity. And one of the things they came up with for this particular project was a majority of the work in Taylor's Ferry can be done at night, so it doesn't conflict with other work and doesn't impact the traffic flow on Taylor's Ferry. So there's been a noise variance already approved for that night work that we need to adjust the dates on it when we actually have a construction contract in place. But that's one of the tools that they're going to use to try to minimize the interference.
Good.
Thank you, that's helpful. How long will the work at night be going on?
We believe it'll be about a total of 2 months, 8 weeks.
So, people will be complaining to me because they think that noise is still in development services, and then they'll be complaining to you. So let's make sure we keep in touch with the neighborhood association to let them know.
Well, we already have a canned answer we're going to use, which is that Steve and Amanda complained about the smell, the odor, and so we're trying to correct it.
Trying to distract them from the odor.
But you, anticipating what one of my colleagues may ask you, the original ordinance was drafted in June, and you have an estimated contract cost of $2.7 million. What we're seeing is bidding coming in above estimates now, not below, with the economy turning. If you find that estimate was unduly conservative, and if you conclude that we're starting to see pressure on the bids because of just the activity in the marketplace, let's take that up at a future check-in, because the mayor made an excellent point recently that we may need to start adjusting our estimates based on the market realities and take into consideration the fact that we're not getting the benefit of the lower bids that we did during the recession. They're coming in above some of our estimates because many of the firms were soliciting or at or near capacity. So let's monitor this one and see where it comes in. But if it turns out that the engineer's estimate is unduly modest, let's incorporate a good idea I heard it here recently, which is let's start considering the impact of the marketplace in our estimates, so we're not there isn't a delta.
Sure. Thank you. Other questions? No one to testify on this item, I don't believe. Okay, then this rolls over to second reading. Thank you very much. And one more project here, or one more purchase, 834.
Mike, why don't you come up?
Authorize an open and competitive solicitation for a contract to purchase sodium hypochlorite to disinfect treated wastewater in the amount of $650,000 annually.
Thank you. Our wastewater treatment operations manager is here, Mike, and he's going to walk us through this very briefly. This item seeks authorization for procurement services to go out for bid for a commodity called sodium hypochlorite. Hypochlorite is a strong bleach solution used to disinfect treated wastewater. Disinfection is required by our regulatory permit with DEQ. A smaller portion of the total volume of hypochlorite is used for odor control at the treatment plant. Mike Cioli is here, again, the wastewater treatment operations manager, to walk us through the essentials. Mike.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As the Commissioner stated, disinfection is required by the regulatory permit with DEQ. The dosage and therefore the volume of use correlates to the very strict requirement that pathogens in the wastewater are eliminated. The usage, therefore, is contingent on volume of flow coming through the treatment plant, which can vary somewhat daily and from year to year. This is particularly true with a combined sewer system such as we have in Portland. However, our experience in running the system is sufficient to give confidence in the estimated volume of hypochlorite needed within a fairly modest range. The current supply contract expires in September, and we need to proceed with an open and competitive bidding process in order to get a new contract in place. The current contract cost is just under $600,000 annually. We expect that the unit price may be slightly higher than it was 5 years ago, and therefore the new contract is estimated to be about $650,000 annually. Contract is projected to be for 5 years with the option to renew for an additional 5 years. I'll stay to take any questions if there are any.
What's the quantity? Just curious. What would $650,000 buy in terms of quantity of chlorine?
Right now, we're paying about 69 cents a gallon, so it's just right around 1 million gallons a year.
Wow.
A lifetime of wash and dry at your house.
I should hope. Yeah, maybe.
It would be never a white shirt that was stain free.
Right.
This much.
Right. It's a lot of chlorine.
It is.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mike.
And that also passes to second reading, and we are adjourned.
So.